A musician's struggle with addiction and his path to rehabilitation. Up next on Carpe Diem. Hello, at Montclair State University, I'm Ryan Quinn, and welcome to Carpe Diem. Today, we're going to watch an amazing story of downfall and redemption. Mike Jenna, an 80s rock star, has spent a decade suffering from drug addiction. Let's take a look at his journey from addiction to recovery.
Are you filming me? My name is Michael Jenna. So I started out at about 15 or 16 in a band called Nasty Habits with a bunch of guys that were way older, and we were playing clubs in Manhattan. Life was awesome. A 15-year-old kid playing on stage in front of 25-year-old girls and drinking and partying.
You know, he was one of us. We had a great group of friends, lived in this great little neighborhood called Middle Village, Queens, where everyone knew everyone. And you know, Mike got into his share of trouble every now and then. Nothing really serious. We all did.
Me and my wild days. Hard to tell. Can you see the difference? See the similarity? Big, teased out hair with a ton of hairspray, eyeliner, lipstick, leopard print shirts, leather pants, thigh-high leather spiked boots. Just a wild man. There was no responsibilities. I rarely had jobs. All I did was drink, do drugs, play music, meet women. It was a lot of fun. That was my whole life. I mean, there was a time when, like, I'd have a place to stay, but I had this van, and I would travel around. I play in 4 or 5 different bands at once, just because that was my life, was music and drugs. And it reached a point when drugs really became more important than the music. When I was 21, I was in a band called Lace in New York, and the singer was my very, very closest friend I've ever had in my life. And I walked in his house and found him dead of a heroin overdose. At that time in New York City, heroin was pretty big. Different types of downer pills were pretty big. And they tried to keep me protected from that stuff, the guys I was in a band with at that time, but eventually the drugs and that crowd pulled me into it, and I started doing heavier drugs even at a really early age. It started out like Valium or Quaaludes, and I would drink hard liquor and beer, but eventually I found my way to cocaine, which was my first drug of choice, my first true love. Before any woman or anything else, it was cocaine. Once I got introduced to cocaine, my life became extremely unmanageable, almost immediately.
Addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward circuitry. It's characterized by an inability to abstain from using substances, craving for substances, and impairment in behavioral control.
Eventually turned to stealing from my parents, stealing from my brothers, stealing from my friends, or lying. Whatever I had to do to get more, that became as much of a part of my life as music. We were all doing it together, and it was fun. And what I found was a lot of the guys would stop at a certain point and go home or go to sleep, but I couldn't stop. I'd keep going until there was no way to keep going.
Oftentimes people have a susceptibility to developing addiction. Once you're exposed to a substance, that reward is exacerbated.
I guess after a few years, I did see Mike back in the neighborhood. And when I saw him, his physical appearance had changed, and I knew from his physical appearance that something wasn't right. I wasn't quite sure what he was dealing with, but I knew that he was dealing with something, and it didn't look good at the time.
I'd get kicked out of my house all the time. I'd end up living at people's houses, living off people because they didn't want to get a job. I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I knew I couldn't stop. I wanted to stop, and I can't explain it. I was just powerless.
It becomes the primary important aspect of someone's life. So they lose interest in their family, their friends, food, work, important relationships, and they pursue that substance.
I weighed 108 pounds. I would be up for days without sleeping. I wouldn't shower. My house was filthy. My clothes were filthy. I had no friends. It was just horrible. It was just a terrible way to live. I couldn't get a place to spend the night. And I wouldn't tell anybody I was homeless. I tried to meet a girl to get me a place to stay or something. But if it didn't work, I'd go down to a subway and sleep on a train. My music career was over. The party was over. I was very depressed because I didn't have my crazy rock and roll life, and just started doing cocaine in the form of crack and drinking out of control, and doing heroin too, whenever I could get my hands on it. And that's when my whole life became about drugs and nothing else. December 31st, 1998, a friend and I were driving back from Gettysburg with enough drugs to go to jail for a very, very long time. And a police officer made a U-turn right behind me and put his lights on. And I just sat up and I just prayed. I said, God, if I get out of this, I'll stop. And the cop pulled next to us and drove off in front of us and took off. And I had to stop. And I was like, did that really just happen? And I just said, you know, this has to stop. I'm going to go to jail. And 8 days later, I went to treatment.
The first step to treatment would be to admit to yourself that you may have a substance use disorder.
I called Cumberland County's Drug and Alcohol Commission, and I told them I needed help. And they said, we could get you into a rehab. They taught me that my brain chemistry had changed. I have a disease. I'm powerless once I use. And the only way I could have some form of control is if I don't pick up and don't use.
It's a brain disease. It's not a character defect.
So I got out of treatment and used on and off over an 8-month period. I finally got clean and never used again as of August 10th, 1999. I started college in January of 2012. I went to Albright College. I majored in applied psychology, organizational behavior, and I graduated in May of 2016. I'm pretty damn proud of that, man. I work in a rehab for men that are on state parole that have tested positive like in a drug test with their parole agent, and their parole agent doesn't send them to jail, they'll send them to our rehab. And basically, the therapy comes from the community. The community is the healer. The counselors, we just drive. We just say, go this way and go that way. I'm proud of myself. I'm really happy to be where I am today. And had I not gone to treatment, had I not gone to meetings, I wouldn't be where I am.
With me today to talk about drug abuse prevention is Montclair State University's health coordinator and the facilitator at Recovery Room, Dr. Marie Cascarano. Hello, Dr. Cascarano.
Hello.
So you're the health coordinator, so tell me, what is that?
So I oversee the Office of Health Promotion, and we are here to provide students with tools, information, and resources so they can make informed decisions about their health. We cover everything from safer sex and alcohol and other drugs, nutrition, sleep, stress.
And you're the facilitator at Recovery Room, correct?
Correct.
So tell me, what is Recovery Room?
So Recovery Room is an informal space where students who are actively in recovery or who are looking to explore their relationship with alcohol and other drugs can come in a safe environment and meet weekly with their peers.
So do you see people who currently have a drug abuse problem or like to know more about effects of drugs?
Correct. So there are some people who have had an experience where alcohol or other drugs have had a negative impact on their lives, and they're looking for information and resources and to meet with other people who may have similar experiences.
So what kind of drugs are these students, like what are they abusing or addicted to or using?
We've seen a variety of different drugs. Alcohol is one of the ones that is a common thread amongst all of them. However, we have seen students who have been addicted to heroin, who have been addicted to crystal meth, and some other types of drugs. Marijuana is also another one that's commonly used.
So the heavier ones like heroin and meth, is that very common here?
Well, it's all relative. You know, there is definitely a percentage of students that use it, and more we have seen that are addicted with drugs like heroin.
Right. So once they come to Recovery Room, what's the process from there? What are they looking for?
Well, again, it varies. We have had students who are in sobriety, you know, have a year without using, 7 years. So those students seek different types of services. They just kind of need support. They want a check-in place where they can kind of talk about their lives and challenges, but still maintain their sober way of living. For other people who have not yet made that choice to become sober yet, they may require other resources. So a lot of times they just want somebody to listen to. Sometimes they need a linkage to available resources, whether it be on or off campus. So again, it's a very individual process.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a rehabilitation center then.
I don't know if it's rehabilitation per se, but it's definitely a safe space, again, where students can really explore their relationship with alcohol and other drugs and see what options are available for them. Again, we're not going to be in a position to tell a student what they need to do because, recovery doesn't work that way. And the student has to be in a position where they want to get the help in order for it to be effective.
So what are the biggest challenges that come with a recovery room?
I think some of the biggest challenges is, seeing students kind of come in week after week, and they're in a similar situation and they're kind of stuck. I'm just glad that they're there to seek the resources, but sometimes they can't get from that knowing that there is a problem to actually linking up to the services that could potentially help them.
So I've spoken with a former addict and an addiction specialist, and they both told me that addiction is not a choice, it's a brain disease. That's correct, yes?
Correct. So addiction is a disease that affects both the brain and behavior, and it's a combination of a variety of factors, including behavioral, biological, and environmental factors that causes the addiction.
Yeah, because there's currently a stigma where a lot of people do believe that drug addiction is a choice, and that's absolutely not true.
No, the research indicates that once the addiction takes over the brain, the willpower and or choice is impaired.
All right, so when these people come to recovery room, what kind of condition are they in usually? Do they look fine, or can you tell that this person is suffering from something?
Again, it depends on the individual. We've seen people who, in spite of being, sober for several years, they still struggle with the stresses of life. Other individuals, they're just stressed and they're trying to deal with their circumstances in their lives, whether it be family problems, whether it be relationship problems. And so, we don't very often see people who are actively under the influence in recovery room, but we can definitely see the impact it's having on their lives.
And is recovery room only for Montclair students?
Correct, yes. So it has to be a currently enrolled Montclair State University student.
All right, so what do you think is the advantages to having this on campus instead of just referring them to a local clinic or something like that?
So this is another support service. We meet every Tuesday from 3 to 4:30. It's a very open situation, so students that have class can kind of pop in and out. There's no commitment. They don't have to stay the entire time. It is on campus, so students who live on campus have easier access to it. And some people just don't like a traditional 12-step program model. So again, this is just one way to get them linked to support services.
All right, so just real quick, do you have any advice for somebody currently suffering from drug abuse?
There is help available. Everybody's process is different. Try different things. Just because one thing doesn't work doesn't mean that everything is not going to work for you, but there is help and you can get help.
All right, well, Dr. Cascarno, I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show. If you or someone you know suffers from drug abuse or alcohol abuse and is looking for help, be sure to call your physician or ask your hospital for referrals. For Carpe Diem, I'm Ryan Quinn. Thanks for watching.